Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, again. This is David Walker from the ODOT Office of Transit, and I'd like to welcome you to the second installment of our Ohio Coordination Program, Ohio Job Access and Reverse Commute Program, and Ohio New Freedom Program application webinar. Um, and I'd like to let you know that this meeting is being recorded. And it will be posted on our YouTube channel for future reference. Or if you have to step away, you'll be able to catch up with what you missed. So we're getting a few more participants that keep streaming in, but I don't want to wait too much longer to get started. If you were able to attend the webinar on last Monday, you may not get anything new out of this one, but it may not hurt to just hear everything again if you'd like. So you're welcome to stay, but I will try to make sure that I hit all the highlights as I did on Monday. And I have I'm not sure, can people see the mouse moving? No, maybe that, now there's a pointer, I can try to use that. Oh, okay. So, well, let me get started. I'm just going to go through the application packet page by page, and if anybody has any questions, just stop me at any time. There's a chat box. I'll try to keep an eye on that, but just please stop me if you have any questions, and that also means that since your phones are not muted, we can hear if you have any extraneous conversations, so please try to keep that down if possible. We appreciate that. So if you have the application in front of you, you can follow along, or you can just watch on screen. We have a table of contents that tells you what's in the package, list of appendices, and now we'll talk about the program information and project selection criteria. Again, this is these funding opportunities are available to nonprofit organizations and governments for projects targeted to the special transportation needs of specific targeted populations. This application packet describes those programs and explains how eligible applicants may apply for these funds. Now we have in bold print information stating that the JARC and New Freedom programs were repealed due to MAP 21, which was the surface transportation authorization legislation that was passed a couple years ago. So we still have funding available for 2015, but beyond that, we are saying that it will not be available. There's a very slight chance that some will be, if not everything is used in 2015, but so what we are looking for is just people to be aware that any project that you submit should be treated as a pilot project with no guarantee of funding beyond this 1-year period, 2015. That said, I think that I can safely say that for JARC, you may be able to apply for a 2-year period if you already received JARC funding in the past. If you are interested in applying for a 2-year period, you may do so, but this, if we could only fund 1 year of funding, we will only fund 1 year, but at least you'll get that 1 year. So the Job Access and Reverse Commute Program, the JARC program, was created by Congress to help workers transition off of welfare rolls. There are unique transportation challenges for low-income workers. seeking to get and keep jobs. There are also many jobs in suburban areas that may be difficult for low-income workers to get to on regular public transportation. So the goal of the JARC program is to improve access to transportation services to employment and employment-related activities for welfare recipients and other low-income individuals, and to transport residents to suburban employment opportunities. The Federal Transit Administration provides this funding for transportation services planned, designed, and carried out to meet the transportation needs of eligible program participants. We are responsible for the portion of that funding in Ohio for areas under 200,000 in population. Each of the areas that have more than 200,000 in population receives their own allocation of funding under the JARC program. Some areas still have JARC funding available. Those large urban areas are Akron, Canton, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown. But for all other areas, our funding is still available, and also it may help you to ask. We can talk about things right now if you'd like, or you can ask me later if a specific area of the state may be eligible. But if you're in a rural area, you can usually safely assume that you would be eligible. But there's some quirks as to how we define the areas. So if you're close to a larger city, you might want to just double check. Now, the New Freedom Program was authorized by Congress to fund transportation services that go above and beyond the minimums required by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Individuals who are transportation disadvantaged face different challenges, and the New Freedom Program fills the gaps between the available forms of transportation to integrate individuals with disabilities into the workforce and full participation in the community. Going above and beyond the requirements of the ADA may include extending paratransit service hours and days, extending a fixed route transit provider's 3/4-mile paratransit service area, or providing extra assistance to riders. It also includes any demand response, accessible public transportation service targeted to individuals with disabilities if there is no public transit system available. And the same geographic restrictions that apply to the JARC funding apply to the New Freedom funding. Our funding that comes to us from the Federal Transit Administration is only for areas under 200,000 in population. And the New Freedom Program, like the JARC program, was repealed by MAP 21, but the funds that had been apportioned remain available. And after this year, unlike the JARC program, the 5310, or Enhanced Mobility for Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program will be offered for funding some operating projects. So even though the New Freedom Program was repealed and the old money that we have available will be used up after this round of funding, there will be additional money for New Freedom type projects going forward. So keep that in mind. Put it in your back pocket. The next programs that are listed are actually 5310, Elderly Individuals and Individuals with Disabilities Program, and that name was changed by MAP 21 to the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program. And those are mentioned here because those programs fund mobility management projects. And mobility management projects, I'll go into a little more detail about what those are, but that funding is mentioned here because some of 5310 funds are used to fund mobility management projects, although the majority of that money goes to ODOT's specialized transportation program, which is a completely different application than this. So, any questions before we continue? Okay, moving on. All these programs require that the projects being applied for are derived from or included in a locally developed, coordinated public transit human services transportation plan. I could do an entire webinar or an entire day probably on talking about the coordinated transportation plan and that process and what it can do. It is a requirement that for the geographical area being served by the project, this plan is in place, is adopted, and it's in the project that you're applying for is in the plan. We have a list of the plans on our website that we are aware of, but these are locally developed plans. So it's important that if you are applying, you are very familiar with that plan and the projects and strategies it is calling for. Because those have been vetted through a public process, and they should be relatively non-controversial at this point. So please be aware that's an element in the actual application process that you will explain a little bit about the coordinated transportation plan for your area. So available funding, any capital that you are applying for can be funded at 80%. 80% of eligible expenses will be reimbursed to you. And capital includes mobility management. For a planning project, and that's only for planning projects for the work-related transportation needs of low-income individuals or reverse commuters, also 80%. But again, since that JARC funding is going away, it's going to be difficult to justify a planning project since there won't be any additional funding, or at least there won't be much after this year with which to apply for that project. But we still include that anyway, just since it is an eligible use for that money. Operating, when you pay for the drivers, the fuel, the vehicle maintenance, that sort of thing is reimbursable at 50% of eligible project expenses net of the fare revenue. The local share is your responsibility as the applicant, and you may use non-U.S. Department of Transportation federal funds for that local share. So actually it's a little bit of a misnomer to say local share. It's really the non-U.S. DOT share. Other appropriate sources of local share include revenue from human service contracts, state or local tax revenue or appropriations, private donations, advertising revenue, concession revenue, etc. There are more potential options than that, but it's important when you do submit your budget, which we'll talk about a little later in the webinar, that you explain that local share to us. And we encourage you to find non-US DOT federal funds to use for your local share. Examples could be Title 3B, Title 19, or Medicaid, CSBG, just to name a few. In-kind is allowable, but the documentation must be submitted and approved by ODOT. There are lots of potential issues with in-kind, so we really do encourage that your local share be from a cash source. Eligible applicants for this funding include nonprofit organizations and governments. We do encourage private sector participation. However, we are not able to give a grant to a private for-profit or company directly. So we do encourage, and that's also part of the application process, which I'll talk about a little bit later, reaching out to any potential private sector private for-profit companies that may be interested in working on this project with you. I mentioned that capital and planning are reimbursable at 80%, and operating is reimbursable at 50%. Capital procurement consists of the acquisition of vehicles or transportation-related equipment. However, we will not fund a standalone capital project other than a mobility management project. So say you are just interested in getting a vehicle and you're not interested in the operating or anything else, we would not be able to fund that with this opportunity. That's more of an opportunity for the specialized transportation program. But if you already have a JARC or New Freedom operating project and you're interested in applying for vehicles to replace an old vehicle or to expand your fleet, this is an opportunity for you to apply for that funding. Now, bottom of page 5 and page 6, page 7, I spend a lot of time here talking about mobility management. I could also spend a whole webinar talking about what mobility management is and what it can do and the benefits. But it's really a customer-focused approach to designing and delivering transportation services. Many of you may already be mobility managers, or you may know people who are mobility managers. It basically allows an individual to plan and design transportation services for a community without having to worry about the actual operations of that service. Whereas traditionally, especially in a transit system, the transit manager has to focus on operating their system, and they may not have that much time to do mobility management or transportation coordination. By funding these full-time mobility managers, we are looking to really get some good programs started in the communities, really be responsive to the needs of everyone out there for their transportation. So mobility management can be funded at 80%, just like a vehicle procurement can be funded at 80%. We are looking, we specify this year, new this year, that we may accept applications for regional mobility management projects, not just local, and that's explained here at the top of page 7. We explain types of mobility management practices, things that mobility managers can do, but that mobility management does not include operating public transportation services. Does not include operating, that right here. So, and we are also stating this year very plainly that at least one person must staff the mobility management project. Multiple individuals may staff the project as long as at least one individual, the mobility manager, is dedicated to the project full-time. And if I can go on and on and on about mobility management, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. Also somewhat different this time around is that basically we have some mobility managers that we fund that we funded back when the old Ohio Coordination Program involved just state of Ohio funding. There was no federal funding involved. And in recognition of the somewhat different nature of those projects, we are going to allow organizations that receive funding from the Ohio Coordination Program prior to 2009, as long as they don't receive any other type of operating funding from the Office of Transit, to apply as the Consolidated Transportation Services mobility manager. And that way you'll have different set of expectations than we would for a mobility manager as defined on the previous pages. Okay, I'm going to skip planning projects since I very highly doubt we will actually get any, and mention just briefly that operating projects involve the provision of transportation using buses and vans and fixed route or demand response service. Um, those are pretty clear-cut, pretty straightforward, and 50% of the eligible expenses are reimbursable with federal funds. And eligible activities, as I've actually, this is kind of restating what we've already said, but you're looking for services targeted to welfare recipients and low-income individuals or reverse commuters. New Freedom is for individuals with disabilities, and Ohio Coordination Program funds mobility management. The JARC and New Freedom programs must serve those small urban and rural areas under 200,000 in population. And it is true that the Ohio Coordination Program does not have any geographic restrictions. So generally we don't really promote the Ohio Coordination Program to large urban areas, but we may possibly consider a request from a large urban area for a mobility management project. However, all large urban areas already have their own funding that they may be able to use for mobility management projects. So we may not be as willing to fund a large urban mobility management project, but it depends on individual circumstances of that area. We do have project selection priority a little bit this time around, and for JARC projects, if a project is in an area that's not already served by an ODOT-funded rural transit system, we will give that an evaluation score just of a weight of 1. But if the county already has a rural transit system, we will weight that score by 0.75. This is to give a priority to applicants with projects not already served by ODOT-funded rural transit systems. As I said, that JARC funding is starting to get scarce, so we are encouraging, in a small way here, projects that are already JARC projects already in areas that are served by rural transit systems, just to keep that in mind. Now, most likely, how much of an impact that may have, I'm not sure, but it's I wouldn't say that you shouldn't apply because of that if you were thinking of applying as a rural transit system, but just that it's something we're going to try doing. And then for Ohio Coordination Program, we are giving priority to those new, quote, new mobility management projects. And those are going to be weighted by a score of 1. The pre-2009 type projects will be weighted by 0.75. So again, I wouldn't say don't apply if your score is going to be weighted by 0.75, but we're just trying to give some priority to the full-fledged mobility management projects. So we want to make sure that applications are received by the deadline, they're complete, they're submitted by a qualified organization, and that projects are included in the coordinated transportation plan. But however, if an application is late or incomplete, it still may be accepted at the discretion of the Office of Transit Administrator. We will be reviewing applications by at least 2 members of the ODOT Office of Transit staff, and we really do plan on making final decisions no later than July 31st. So evaluation criteria, we have just a simple 10-point system for each of 5 different criteria. The derivation from the locally developed coordinated public transit human services transportation plan is worth 10 points. We want to make sure that you're justifying your assertion that the project was derived from one or more projects and strategies that were included in the plan. The only tricky thing is that to encourage applicants to update those coordinated transportation plans, we are going to take away a few points for plans that have not been updated for a long time. And that's what this table is showing. This is the same thing we did last year, for those of you that applied last year. Other criteria include a well-written description of the project, demonstrated need for the project, realistic outcomes, and how the quality of the budget and budget narrative. So for a total of 50 points. Section K talks about some general program requirements. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these. They're not really any different than they've been in the past. Just we want to also always remind people that do receive funding for capital procurement projects to receive our concurrence before each step of the procurement process. Another new item this year is these expected annual tasks for mobility management projects. We would like to just briefly go over these. I don't think this is going to be too much of a burden for most projects. These do not apply to the coordinated or the consolidated transportation operations mobility manager, but if you are going to be applying for a full-time mobility management project, the quote new type project, we are asking that you plan on completing these activities over the course of the year and document that you are doing those activities. Project period, we are interested in awarding grants for a period of 12 to 24 months. We are not likely to award a new program a 24-month grant. We'll probably, anything that's a new application will most likely be only awarded for a 12-month period. Projects will begin on January 1st, 2015, or as defined in the contract, but in very rare circumstance, almost never would we not have a program start on January 1st, 2015. And grant administration is pretty much the same and kind of fine print. And MAP 21, as I mentioned already, has changed how this funding will be in the future. So before I go on to how to actually fill in the grant application, are there any questions at this point? Is everybody asleep?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry, David, if I gave you static. This is Robin Richter. I didn't have it on mute, so I apologize for anything. I have a question. On the regional mobility management projects,
Yes.
that has to be at least 3 counties. What if 2 of the counties have adopted plans, but one county's coordinated plan is not updated?
It only has to be the plan for the largest percentage of the population.
Okay.
We got a clarification from FTA, a verbal clarification on a question that we asked that question. It does not have to be in every county's coordinated plan. So.
Okay. Well, it's the activity that we want to do is in every county's coordinated plan. It's just one of the 3 plans hasn't been updated since 2008. So the activity there, it's just that I didn't know how that was on the scoring criteria with that one plan not being updated.
We'll go by the most populated counties plan.
Okay,
if you have a multi-county project
okay.
for the scoring purposes.
And could you please, um, could you go over just one more time the difference between the consolidated transportation mobility management project and I guess I would regular mobility management project?
Well, basically the Consolidated Transportation Services Mobility Manager is going to be spending more time supervising drivers and things that we've normally said you can't do as a mobility manager. They run a coordinated transportation system. But remember that only those organizations that do not receive an operating grant from the Office of Transit would be eligible. And so I know your organization does receive a few of them.
Right.
So it just,
Okay, I think I understand.
yeah.
So all right. Consolidated.
That's okay. That's okay. It's a good question. So are there any other questions?
David, this is Cheryl Thiessen with Jacksonville Community Action.
Hi, Cheryl.
How are you today?
All right, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. One of the statements that you was talking about for the consolidated, that you said that you can apply for the consolidated mobility manager funding as long as you didn't have other, if you're not receiving other operating monies.
Right.
So if you're already administering JARC and New Freedom, then you wouldn't be able to apply for the consolidated mobility manager piece?
Generally, that's right.
All right, that answers my question.
Okay. All right. We're at about 2:30, so we'll spend the rest of the webinar talking about the different components of the application. So again, if you have questions about any specific components of the application, you can ask me. There's my phone number and email address. We are asking, as we have in the past, that we receive one hard copy mailed in and email one electronic copy of the application. And the due date is May 7th. There's a required public notice that must be published no later than April 22nd in order to make that May 7th due date. And again, anything that is going to be late may not be accepted. We're not saying that they will not be, but we would probably like to see some kind of explanation as to when we would expect your application if it's going to be late. So at least get something to us by the deadline if you're not able to submit the entire application. But we wouldn't be able to really extend that application acceptance date for more than a few days. So try to really treat May 7th as a hard and fast deadline if you can. And here's the address to mail that hard copy of the application. So the required components of the application are in this chart. And in this chart, we'll go over this right now. The chart's repeated. We took pieces of the chart and repeated it in these pages here, or these following pages that provide more detail. And I'm going to try to switch between the documents here, so hopefully this will work. Let me see. Here is Appendix A. Everyone see that? You see a document that says sample? Is Does anyone see Appendix A?
Yes, we see.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So this is to help you with your proposal letter. You can replace the text in brackets with your information. That way we know what you're asking for, and you sign the letter. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Then, let me see here. I can make this work. The letter, you just adapt the letter for the combination of projects you're applying for. Make a nice table of contents so we see what's in the application that you're submitting. And then Appendix B has your authorizing resolution, as we've required in the past. I'll bring that up. Just replace the text that's highlighted with the text that meets your situation. We would like you to do a formal resolution. If you're not able to do a resolution, please let me know, and we'll work something else out. But if you have your own format of doing resolutions, please use your own format. This is a sample. But if you note that it does talk about who's going to be authorized to execute and file the proposal, who's authorized to do Title VI, and who's authorized to execute the grant agreements and that sort of thing. And that's signed by the person who needs to sign from the board, and then the bottom of the second page has a place for the recording officer to sign that it's a true and correct copy of a resolution. So that is Appendix B. Appendix C is the coordination self-certification. And this is where we put in that language saying that if a project service area includes more than one coordinated planning area or more than one coordinated plan, certification only needs to refer to that plan encompassing the largest share of the project population. So Appendix C is where I have that self-certification. It's the same as a form that was in the last year's proposal, and this copy doesn't have the functionality as the one that you'll be using, but there's some buttons here. You check one of these two buttons, and you can type into it and fill in the information. You'll put the pages of the plan that has the list of projects from which your project is derived. And you also mention the plan's priorities for implementation, what pages those are on. Now, for the scoring purposes, it's important that you justify the statements that you made on this page. So it's not enough just to say, yep, here it is, it's derived, and move on. We want to know what you're thinking about, because we know that not always are you going to be able to say the exact thing that I'm going to be applying for is listed in the plan. So especially if there are any slight variations on what the plan says or what the plan calls for, this is your chance to explain your assertion that the plan has your project in it, that the project does address one or more of the gaps identified and does fulfill one or more of the plan's priorities for implementation. That's where you would type that information in. And then on the last page of this appendix, you would describe the planning process used. List who was involved with the planning process, provide details on public outreach efforts. So, and really the more you can give us, the better for this, because it's very important that we know that your plan was not done in a vacuum. That is Appendix C. And you would attach to next thing would be the pages that are referenced in Appendix C. You would include copies. We'd also like to see the title page and the adoption pages, and then as well as the pages that were referenced in that self-certification form. And Appendix D is the what we're calling the application for federal assistance. It's this is actually also a PDF document that you can type into. Well, I can't demonstrate it for you here. Most people will type in application. We'll check the application box. You'll check new. You'll type the legal name of the applicant, the EIN, the DUNS number, the address, and so on. Just kind of straightforward organizational contact information, executive director's name, total organizational budget, type of applicant. You can leave, actually I think that some of this was already filled in on the version that you are going to be using. I'm not sure why it's not showing up here, but if you have any questions about this, of course, please let me know. You add an attachment that shows the areas affected by the project. If you have a map, you can attach that here. You can you type in the title of your project and the congressional districts, the start and end date, the funding amount, and by the way, put the total that you're applying for in box A. Put the local share that the applicant is providing in B, any state funding in C, which does not mean that like ODOT, but other state funding. Any local funding from local agencies in D, any other federal funding in E, and program income would be the fair revenue. So G is the total project cost, and that's calculated for you. And that's about it for that. So that is the application for federal assistance. It's something that we have not used before in this format, but it's pretty much the same information that we've requested. And a lot of that information on the instructions explains what to put in those fields. And then for your hard copy, we'll print out that third page and sign it and include that with the hard copy. We have a transportation provider profile, that's Appendix E. And that is also a somewhat new way of asking for some of the same stuff we've asked for in the past. This is something that you can even keep and use in other instances. This is just where you would put transportation-specific information, including service characteristics, days, hours of operation, type of routes, fees charged, payment accepted, some information on their vehicles, drivers, the riders that you're targeting, and so on. So that's actually pretty straightforward. One question might be, would this be, as you are now, or as you want to be if you got the grant, or just for the grant itself? And the answer to that would be, if you need to break it out into multiple versions of the form, you can do that. I'm not going to be that picky about it. I think you should put on here how you want to be if you were to receive the funding for the grant. If you had to just put one version of this form in your application. Then we would like you to submit a table of organization. If you don't have a table of organization, you should submit a list of key staff for the project. Then a project narrative, and there's no form for that, but this is where you really be creative about the who, what, why, when, and how of the project. And so don't forget about that part. Project questions. is Appendix F. And it actually may be helpful to fill out Appendix F and then write the narrative, because some of it will be a little bit duplication, which is okay. This is where these are short answer type questions. Starts with, what is the name of the project, and provide a brief summary of the project. What's the goal of the project? Explain how you've planned and designed this project. Who are the target populations? One question that's naturally probably should be here is what's the geographic area served, but that, of course, was asked on the application. So, what are the priority outcomes of this project? ADA questions. Estimating numbers of people that will be served and explaining how you arrived at the estimate. There are some questions that are not applicable to all potential projects, and that's always, if there's a, for example, if you're only going to be considering, if you only like to be considered for JARC program funding, you wouldn't have to talk about the number of seniors and people with disabilities that would be afforded mobility. But so I would, if you are able to answer any questions, I encourage you to do so. These are, again, short answer, 1 or 2 paragraphs each at the most. Sometimes you only need maybe 1 sentence to answer, but do your best. Then we have different sections of the questions that, like these 2 questions are only for Ohio Coordination Program projects. Then there's questions that are only for JARC projects. Again, if you are able to answer these questions, I would encourage you to do so. New Freedom questions. Then stop here if you were applying, it says stop here if you were applying for operating funding. Continue if you're applying for mobility management funding. And there's a section for local and regional mobility management project questions. And regional, there's 1 question for regional mobility management project applicants. And there's the last section for coordinated transportation and operations manager applicants. That actually probably should be consolidated transportation rather than coordinated. But so it seems like a lot of questions, and it kind of is, but not all of them necessarily need to be answered by each applicant. So project questions. The next item is the budget. Now, you already provided in the application a very, very brief budget, just basically amounts. So this budget has the details. And there's also a separate budget narrative that you would submit that would have the even more detail than this. But, oops, sorry, I'm pushing the wrong button. So the first, I can't actually demonstrate how the spreadsheet works, but just remember that you only have to input data into blue shaded cells. So like you enter your name, the applicant's name here, and the years the projects will occur here, and then everything else is automatically filled in as you go forward. And if you have any capital items or planning items that you are requesting funding for, those go in this table, and then the local share for those items goes in this table. And if you get an OK, then the FTA funds and the local share are sufficient to cover the costs. If you have mobility management and or operating projects, those would go on to this page. This first column here is for mobility management projects, and the next 3 columns are for operating projects. You can have up to 3 different operating projects on this budget. And remember that we are asking you to put vehicle hours and vehicle miles that you're estimating will be used in each project here at the top of the page, but then fill in the rest of these numbers using the account codes and descriptions, classifications over here on the left. Passenger fares go here in this line, and those are subtracted from total expenses to reach the net project cost. And maximum federal FTA, USDOT funds are 80% for mobility management and 50% for operating. So for the local share, you down here explain where that local share is coming from. And one of the only differences from last year is that we have a column for source, and you would put here whether the funding is other federal or local or state or applicants' own funds, and then describe a little bit more about those funds. I really encourage people to be much more descriptive with that local share than they have in the past. It really can only help, not hurt you, to provide some of that information. It's something we are often asked, is where do projects get local share? And often,
David?
yes.
I'm sorry, can I stop you? Can you run through what you wanted to see under source a little slower? You said other federal, local, what else?
Right.
For non-description, I get that part, but what you want to see in the source column.
The only options are other federal, applicant, state, and local. So, like I said, we encourage applicants to use other federal funds where possible for the local share. So if you have something like funding from that's derived ultimately from a federal program, like Older Americans Act funding or Community Service Block Grant funding, I mean, that would be an idea of what would be considered other federal. Local would be like local tax revenue or United Way donation. State would be state general revenue fund type money, which I'm not sure how much is even available. Certainly not from ODOT. And then applicant would be anything that the applicant is going to be providing. But again, we really we'll probably see a lot of other federal and local, because a lot of even the funds that applicants do have to provide ultimately are actually from other federal programs. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. You know, I think we just, it's okay, you know, I mean, well, everyone wants to do the best they can, and if you're not absolutely perfect, it won't be the end of the world. We're just trying to figure out a way to get some better information than just saying like, oh, contract revenue. Well, that's good. That's an acceptable source of local share, but it doesn't really say much about what that contract revenue is.
David, I have a question. This is Robin.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody were applying for example, a call center technology or some kind of software on a capital, does a project like that go on this page, or does it only get listed on the prior page where it says capital procurement / planning project?
Yeah, the capital procurement page, because that's anything that has to go through a procurement process, like technology, would be on the procurement page. The only reason mobility management is not is because it's done with an organization's own employees. So it's more like an operating project, even though it's funded as a capital project at 80%. But normally for capital that is procured, such as technology or equipment, it's just a one-line thing and an amount.
And I have one follow-up question then.
Okay.
Switching gears, on the mobility management, since that can be funded through multiple sources, as an applicant, are we to identify the source, whether we feel it fits under OCP or JARC or New Freedom? Because we've just got that one column that says mobility management. Or should we just fill out that budget and you guys then will decide where it falls?
We'll decide where it falls, yeah.
Okay.
The majority of them will fall under the elderly individuals and individuals with disabilities program. But it doesn't really matter from your end which program your funding comes from. Well, tell me.
Well, the only place it matters for us is where we pull the local source of in-kind. There are some sources that match elderly services, but then there's other sources that would match job access and reverse commute. And I would think some wouldn't be allowable across those different paths.
That's a good question. So you're basically saying, could a mobility management project be funded from more than one program?
That's kind of my question, because I have a good source of match on the JARC side, which will do about half of it, and a good source of match on the senior side.
Well, I think that's the kind of thing you can put in there, and then
See where it goes. Okay.
we'll see where. Yeah, I mean I don't see why we couldn't do that. Makes things a little trickier on our end, but it's sometimes difficult to get that local share. So if that's how it has to be, I mean that doesn't seem to be too difficult for us to do. Okay. Well, I want to just wrap up because we only have a few minutes left, although we can go a little bit over if we have to. This local share summary gets filled out automatically from your entries in the previous pages. So there's nothing actually to do here. This just puts it all in one place. And that's the budget. Then the supporting documents include the budget narrative, where you explain how you calculated all the budget amounts. And if you have a cost allocation plan or indirect cost plan that you need to show us, that's a place, that's where you would do so. If you don't know what those are, then you don't have them probably, and they probably don't apply to you. And we explain what would go into the budget narrative, a detailed explanation and calculations for each budgeted line item. Capital procurement forms, that's a little bit different this year, but if you applied for the specialized transportation program, you'll find this to be very similar to that. We are asking that you fill out, if you're looking for vehicles, you provide us your current vehicle inventory, just like for the specialized program, and then you would state the kinds of vehicles you want here on this page. And then if you are requesting any computer hardware or software, that would be this page 5. And if you're requesting any communications equipment, that's page 6 right here. And if you have any questions about how to calculate potential vehicle usage, that's on page 7. So the majority of applicants do not request vehicles, but if you are requesting a vehicle, you'll fill out these forms. Then we have public involvement and private sector participation documentation. That is a new requirement this year that everybody, not just applicants who are requesting capital funding, submit this documentation. There's a sample public notice included as Appendix I that has to be published in a newspaper. Ideally, that would be the newspaper that serves the geographic area of the project. And this sample public notice states that it must be published no later than April 22nd, which is if you are going to submit your application by May 7th and hold you have to give a 2-week notification period for the public notice to let people plan to attend. But of course, in all reality, you probably won't get anybody attending your public hearing. And the public hearing is required. But you can combine, if you're applying for more than one project, you can combine them into one public hearing and one public notice. And you have to provide a 30-day period for public review and comment, and hold that public hearing. Again, this is considered, because these are federal funds, and Federal Transit Administration is concerned that private for-profit companies are able to participate to the maximum extent feasible, and that public involvement is done for projects that affect significant economic, social, or environmental interests. So I realize sometimes it's an exercise in futility, since you may get few, if any, comments back from this, but at least you've done your due diligence, and you got the word out. Now, Title VI is required that you comply with Title VI. So I don't really have time to go into what's required, but those requirements are in Appendix J. You only have to submit the first 3 requirements that are outlined in Appendix J. But if you already have a complete ODOT approved Title VI program, you can just submit that. Now, getting to the very end here, and I apologize we've gone over our time, but I'll wrap up very quickly. We are requiring 1 or more support letters this time. If you are requesting funding for a project other than mobility management, you must obtain a support letter from the mobility management project that serves that service area. There are some exceptions, especially if the same agency has that mobility management project. You don't have to provide a support letter for yourself. If you are requesting funding for a mobility management project, you have to provide 2 support letters from at least 2 of the following entities: the Board of County Commissioners, MPO, Transit System, or lead agency on the locally developed coordinated transportation plan. And if you are a local mobility management project, then you have to obtain a support letter from the regional mobility management project, if any. If you are requesting funding for a regional mobility management project, you have to obtain a support letter from at least 1 of the local mobility management projects. And if another organization will be serving as the grantee, if it's a different organization than the one that's applying, you have to provide a letter from the organization that agrees to act in that capacity. The last few items are documents that are common to many grant applications. They include a board list, complete audit if available, and financial statements if no audit's available. Then an overall budget for the current fiscal year. That can be a high-level budget for the applicant. And then there's a packet of paper that's the federal certifications and assurances that has to be gone over by your attorney and then signed. That's something that we've done after the fact in the past, along with the contract, but we're just putting that with the application for this round. So if you are successful and awarded funding, you'll have that on file, and then you'll just have to have the contract signed going forward. So I realize this is a lot of information to go over in a short amount of time. So I'm sure that as you digest it and think about things, you'll have more questions for me, and so please don't hesitate to ask. Again, most of you already know me and you have my contact information, but I'll try to find that page and bring that up. But of course, you can print out the packet. It's on our website. Any other questions?
David, this is Tammy Riggle. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
On that last page you were just on, talking about the audit and financial statements, when it says overall budget for current fiscal year, is that the entire agency?
The entire agency.
Okay, and then just to recap what you said about certifications and assurances, you're saying that does not have to be completed now to turn in the application. That's before the when the contract comes.
No, that's how it used to be. But this time, it's when you downloaded the zip file, it had the application packet. That certifications and assurances document was in there.
Okay, then I have a question about that. I looked at that, and this time you're given options of selecting from those 24 assurance certifications. Are we?
Well, there was a problem with the original version. That's not the right version. If you download the zip file again, the correct version of the file is in there now.
Okay, is that the one, okay, that we use for, it's the same one that's for 2014?
Well, it says Ohio Department of Transportation, Office of Transit, FTA, Federal Fiscal Year 2014, Certifications and Assurances. So, actually, if you've already, I think because you probably already got that.
Yeah, we just got it signed by our lawyer last week.
Okay. So you don't have, for just for you don't have to fill that out again. Just for Jackson and Vinton. Because we already have that from you guys. But many agencies don't have a 2014 version of that yet. So
You do that, okay.
we wanted to, you guys will. But yeah, remember, if you have a strange looking certifications and assurances thing with a bunch of check boxes on it,
Yeah.
that's the wrong version. So go back to our website and re-download the zip file and get the right version. Because the other version is not Ohio specific, and it's also got a whole bunch of other programs in it that are not part of this application. So I do apologize for that mistake on our part. But so any other questions at this point?
Here.
All right. Well, like I said, we did record this session. If you need to watch it again, it will be available on our website, a link to it. So thank you all for your attention this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks,